Hello. Thank you for joining me again. Bubbles. And toddler over there having fun. Today we're going to be talking about the birth wound. So when we talk about okay, context. Wounds here means it can be physical, but more what I'm referring to is how these things happen esoterically, how these things imprint us mentally, emotionally, on the more subtle planes um, after the physical wounds heal. And you're left with the things that you can't see. So, the way that I understand it, there are different types of birth wounds that we can have, right? There's the birth wounds that we can carry from our own birth, from when our mother gave birth to us. There is the wounds that we can carry from when we give birth to our children. And then there's the collective birth wounds. So what do all these things mean? What do I mean? What do I mean by the birth wound? Well, I think it's well understood and accepted that when we are conceived and through pregnancy, and especially in our early years from 3 and under, we are incredibly impressionable. And everything that happens, whether it's big or little t trauma, imprints us with a certain disposition if we didn't already, behave in a certain way, or, just kind of setting up what they call the scaffolding for the rest of our lives, for the rest of our personalities to be built on. So when our mother gives birth to us, and, maybe she's induced, maybe she's just very angry because she's not being left alone, maybe she doesn't know why she's feeling the way that she is, but she's feeling something other than peaceful and happy or whatever, which is got to be so rare, right? So I think it's pretty fair to say that probably everybody has some type of birth wound from when their mother gave birth to them. Even if it was peaceful and wonderful, there's things that we can find problems with anything. And we'll talk about like what this all means, and the importance of healing these things as soon as we define what all of these things mean. So that's one way that we have the birth wound. Then when we give birth to our own children and things don't go the way that we want to, or maybe it was just really long, or really exhausting, or maybe you wanted to have a home birth and you ended up transferring, whatever the case may be. Or maybe you wanted to be all natural and you ended up with 20 ultrasounds, right? Or whatever the case may be. These things can be internalized as things that didn't go our way, or things that went wrong, or just something that's, not necessarily seen as positive. Because the narrative that you should just be happy that you had a baby, right? Moving into the societal or global birth wound, that one says, oh, we should just be grateful to have had our babies, right? No matter how they happen. And so many other narratives, but we'll just look at that one as an example for conciseness and time's sake. I feel like I could just talk on this stuff for hours. Fascinating. Right, so instead of validating people's experiences with their births, we then are kind of forcing them to internalize these things and make them subconscious, to force these things to not be talked about. And what does that do? The image just came to me of like, if you force dirt into your skin, if you just keep sitting there and like rubbing sweat and dirt and all kinds of things into like a pore on your face, you end up getting a pimple, right? Same thing. You get these things in your personality where it's like at some point things are going to percolate and happen and come out in that way. And sometimes that is because of social narratives, that we've internalized as our own. So I I believe very deeply that it's important, so important to look at these things and decide how we want to handle them consciously. Because even if something is big T traumatic, you were planning a free birth, you ended up having a cesarean or whatever the case may be, or maybe you lost baby or something, terrible happens. Your worst fear is coming true, right? Maybe it's just a little thing like, oh, you tore and now, maybe things look different or whatever the case may be. These things can be handled and digested in a way to where they don't have to control us, right? Because ultimately things are going to happen in life, positive and negative. And the only thing that we ever have power to do is consciously engage with these things. So what I'm positing is just a conscious relationship with these things. It doesn't mean that you have to bypass all of the feelings that are going to come up because these things have happened. I don't believe personally that that's a healthy way to deal with things. I don't find that works very well for me. You're just making more pimples on your skin without realizing or just denying it. Yeah, so how can we heal these things? Well, that's going to be different on an individual basis. And I believe that once all of those things change within us, and once we start taking responsibility for the way that things unfold and finding acceptance, understanding that just because we want things to be a certain way doesn't mean that that's in God's plan in the stars or however you want to see it. Sometimes surrender is necessary, right? And that's really hard for us in any context. And yeah, I think that these things can be handled in a very positive way, even if they aren't positive things. And what that does is it empowers a woman to be able to be fully embodied in herself and able to direct her experience of life in a way where she doesn't feel victimized, right? And that goes the same for fathers. So, and I mean, really this can apply to anything, but I do believe that it would radically change how we birth our babies, how we, hold the narrative of their birth, whether or not we want to have more babies, and maybe you just feel satisfied. I'm not saying that birth wounds stop you from having children. I'm just saying sometimes they might. What if, these things can manifest in so many ways, and all of those ways are valid. I just think it's so important to be able to look at these things holistically and be able to feel resolution with these things so that we can live self-directed lives. And especially as birth workers, I feel like it is absolutely paramount that if you are operating from a wound, if you have formed your life because this happened to me and I don't want it to happen to anybody else, if that's part of your story, then look at that and be honest about that. And decide how you're going to engage with that. If you decide that you don't want to be acting or living from a wound anymore, well, how can you change that? And how can you, instead of changing your life, because I think it's noble and beautiful to want to help people in any capacity, but how can we do that holistically in a way that's going to help us all instead of having to protect and have a savior complex for these things, right? So important in the birth world. And before I just keep going, because I totally could, I will just leave you with all of those thoughts just percolating. So wonderful. It's like a cliffhanger in a movie. It could just go on and on. Might have to make a podcast someday. Thank you for coming and for listening. Ciao.